a truly exciting occasion.
Last week, the Queen went to Scotland to welcome ashore Britain's North Sea oil. Throughout Britain, television viewers watched the Queen arrive for the ceremony at Dice in Aberdeenshire. The presence of 4 cabinet ministers highlighted the importance of oil to Britain's economic survival. Tomorrow, the cabinet turns its attention to Scotland again. Labour ministers will finalise their plans to give more self-government to Scotland and Wales. And devolution promises to be the most important issue when the Queen opens the new session of Parliament later this month. But already alarm is building up amongst English MPs of both parties about the effects of the most far-reaching changes in Britain's internal constitution for 250 years. There's now talk of an English backlash. Some English MPs even foresee the possible breakup of the United Kingdom. World in Action invited 2 of those English MPs to come to Scotland. Ronald, Conservative MP for Beaconsfield, doesn't believe the unity of the United Kingdom should be endangered in any way and opposes any separate assembly for Scotland. Ashton, Labour MP for Bassetlaw, isn't against a Scottish assembly, but wants oil revenues kept firmly under British control. Tonight, our MPs test for themselves the strength of feeling among those who want more oil and more independence for Scotland.
And I think they have a genuine grievance that we as English MPs ought to take a damn sight more interest in what's happening up here.
I think that's absolutely true. There is this feeling of being a long way geographically from London, and I suppose if one examines oneself on this, I don't know how it is with you, but how often have I come up to Scotland to speak to a political meeting or any other kind of meeting? How often have you come up?
Well, I come to trade union weekend schools. My perhaps sole contact with Scotland is through Scottish trade unionists.
We tend to look at the political overtones, but of course 9/10 of the people, 1920s, are not politicians at all, and they're not all that fussed about politics. And what do you think about breaking away from England? Is that...
Well, it's a natural action, I would say, on the part of the Scottish people.
There's a very strong feeling for the separatist movement. You know, I mean, all over I found this.
Total breakaway.
As far as devolution is concerned, well, I'm for it, but not for separatism.
It's worked for centuries. We're the envy of every other country, I think, in the world, our parliamentary system, and I think it should stay like that.
I want to remain British, united.
And I think most people in Scotland do want to remain British, don't they?
I'm a Scotsman, through and through, but I'm also a Britisher.
In 1959, fewer than 1 Scot in 100 voted nationalist, but the Scottish National Party, the SNP, have doubled their vote in every election since. In October 1974, 1 Scot in 3 voted nationalist. The northeast of Scotland is a fertile area for farming and nationalism, but it's also interested in the oil and fish in the North Sea. Fishermen here feel bitter about overfishing and lack of protection from the government in London. Some feel they'd be better off in an independent Scotland. Douglas Henderson, one of the 11 Scottish nationalist MPs now at Westminster, is the member for East Aberdeenshire, including the Peterhead fleet. Ashton was sceptical about the ability of Scots fishermen to go it alone.
Were to go its own way and legislate purely for Scottish interests. Who are you going to sell the fish to? Well, to England?
I think
because the big...
Surely you're not suggesting...
No, but listen, let me just continue, because they would then, what I'm trying to say is there would then be great pressure on a solely English parliament from English fishermen to keep out Scottish fish.
Well,
and they would...
No, wait a minute. Don't get oil. Let us keep the fish. Yes.
That's what he said. It's very important.
Yes,
now, we would then be faced, and you would be faced with it, with protests, parades in the street, people blockading the lorries, refusing to offload, trade union action to protect it from imported Scottish fish. Now, what I'm saying, this situation helps nobody. It's not going to help you to sell. Look, it's not going to help you to sell your fish, and it's not going to help us to get the fish. And by separating like this, it makes the situation worse, not better.
If you stop taking Scottish fish, what are you going to put in its place?
There'll be a demand.
What's the housewife going to get if she doesn't get Scottish fish?
People in Hull or Grimsby will say eat Grimsby fish in its place.
It's a different type of fish completely.
May well be, but they're going to sell that.
This is a luxury fish here that English people have had a taste of and they want. But the fact remains, if we don't have something done very, very shortly, we won't have a discussion like this in another 5 or 10 years' time. There won't be need to have a discussion because the fish will be cleaned up, they'll be away. What Hull and Grimsby would want is every place open, no limits any kind. That suits Hull and Grimsby, but it does not suit the Scottish fishermen. And everything that's been done in relation to this has been done for the benefit of Hull and Grimsby.
Well, they would argue differently. They would say
I should say English fishermen.
They would say you've got jobs and you've no unemployment, and they have no unemployment. And they will turn around and say, you know, you want your cake all your way. That when things were bad in Scotland 10 years ago and England were pouring in the subsidies, that was fine. But now you've discovered the oil, I'm all right, Jack.
Our two English MPs wanted to know more. They questioned Douglas Henderson about Scotland's strength in any international negotiations.
Well, we have two things to negotiate on, oil and fishing. Now, you've got to be far wider spread, really, than that.
Come now. One of the most important things in this world is to grow enough food or to catch enough food to feed yourselves. Yeah. One great thing that Scotland's got is that we are self-sufficient in food. We've got a food surplus. You see, your problem, Joe, in England, and I sympathise with you, is that you can feed yourselves on what you grow for 3 days a week.
Yeah.
Ireland feeds you for a day a week. Okay. We feed you for at least 2 days a week, and you get the rest in the rest of the world. But Scotland doesn't have that problem.
Yeah, but you need other things to live besides food.
Okay, but you try living without food, lad.
Okay.
You try living without food.
You need protection in your own waters under the agreement, and it is the Royal Navy in the end which gives that protection.
I mean, what about any other small country? What about Denmark? What do they do about protection?
They don't do awfully well.
You're not going to tell me that Scotland doesn't have the resources to be a very prosperous country. I mean, actually, what you people are saying to us now used to tell us, oh, Scotland's too poor to have self-government. Now you're telling us you're too rich to have self-government.
We're not saying that at all.
Don't be greedy.
We're not saying
Don't
that
take
at all.
the oil. That's what you're saying.
I don't think seriously you want self-government at all. It's just a pressure device, because you know it would be ridiculous.
My goodness, Ronald. Ronald, where have you been all these years? Where have you been all these years?
That evening, before travelling south from Aberdeen, Joe Ashton and Ronald Bell compared impressions so far.
But I think, you know, every nation has its scapegoat. Now, I tend to complain bitterly down in England that the scapegoat's always the unions. Whatever goes wrong, you know, the newspapers, everything blame the unions. Up here, the scapegoat is the English. That everything that goes wrong is the fault of this lousy government, whether it's Labour or Conservative, down in London, who don't understand the Scots. And they seem to think that everything will be sunshine once they get a parliament of their own, but I think they're going to have exactly the same problems.
Well, of course, and they then grumble about them. And of course, half the English are Scots anyway, if I may put it that way.
Yeah.
You haven't got this. You can't draw a line and say everywhere south of that is the English and north of it is the Scots, because we've intermixed and intermarried so much that really it's all one nation.
On the train to Edinburgh, our MPs joined Douglas Henderson again. As a Scottish nationalist MP, he believes in full Scottish independence and that North Sea oil belongs to Scotland, not Britain. By contrast, Tam Dalyell, who'd been in Aberdeen for the oil ceremony, is the only Scottish Labour MP totally opposed to any measure of independence which might encourage the break-up of the United Kingdom.
Can I put it to you an English point of view? Surely. Now, every MP will vote for what's best for his constituents. You'll vote for what's best for your Scottish constituents. I'll vote for what I think is best for my English constituents. Now, if I see a situation of you saying, well, the oil is Scottish, which is going to make my English constituents poorer, then quite naturally I'm not going to vote for Scotland to have total independence. So you will then have a situation where 83% of the British population is English, and a large number of English MPs seeing that their constituents are going to be worse off if the Scots get all the oil, and those English MPs will vote against Scottish independence. Now, if you come to that sort of situation, where the English MPs who are going to be worse off refuse to give you your freedom, what's the next step?
Well, I think that's a very serious situation that you're putting up, Joe, because that is one that certainly the Scottish people would not accept.
Sure.
And in fact, I think people who didn't vote for the SNP would feel very affronted. And I do warn you of this line of argument.
We would be voting for our own people, same as you are.
Yes, if there is going to be a constitutional dispute between the people representing a majority of seats in Scotland and the United Kingdom government, that's something that can't be confined to these islands.
But are we going to have violence? Now, is the next thing then violence?
No, let me be absolutely clear about this. Our party has set its face entirely against violence. It always has and it always will. We don't believe that that solves anything or gets anybody anywhere. Well, I think Tam will agree, we have denounced violence, we have denounced people who have thought of violence any time this
Douglas,
question has come up.
can I push it one step further, because this is very important. Yeah. Now, if you're not going to have violence with a Northern Ireland situation of bombing and this sort of thing, okay, if you're not going to have that, And if you're going to have a situation where a majority of English MPs refuse to acknowledge a separate Scotland, then what the hell are you going to do?
Well, we have constitutional problem between Scotland and the United Kingdom, and obviously we would have to, other countries would be interested in what Scotland will do in these circumstances. And obviously this can't be contained within these islands.
But are we
I
not
do make that point very seriously.
Yes, but are we not going down a very dangerous road? You know, if we're heading in this direction...
It's a dangerous
road.
road.
You're playing a dangerous game if we get to this sort of situation.
Well,
you know.
you're playing the dangerous game, Joe, with respect.
No,
if you're going to say you're going to stand against the Scottish people's right to have self-government if they vote for it.
But I'm defending the English people's right in my constituency. And I have just as much right as an MP to defend my English constituents as you have to defend your Scottish. We both have an equal vote and an equal right.
I'm not saying you haven't got a right.
So who of us is wrong?
I'm only saying that to have a reluctant Scotland within the United Kingdom
would be
a very, very serious situation.
But equally so, we would have a reluctant England giving you the oil. Now, who's going to be right and who's wrong?
Giving us the oil? It's not yours to give, old boy.
But it is, old boy. It's ours oil just as much as it's yours.
No, it's not.
Look, the people in my constituency fought the last war, paid their taxes, subsidised Scottish coal with English coal, right through the 1960s, and quite rightly now are saying, well, now you've discovered this bonanza, we have just as much right to share in it. We English people have just as much right to share in it as you have done in other things in the past. And I don't think that's too wrong an attitude to take. Well, I think they're quite justified in taking that attitude, that the riches of the nation belong to everybody. There's nothing wrong in me voting for that for my English constituents. So where do we go in this deadlock?
I think you're going into a very dangerous situation if you're saying you're saying really to the Scottish people, you can vote any way you like, but we'll stand against you and we'll stop you.
But you're saying,
you're
saying to my English people, you can vote anywhere you like, but we're going to have the oil.
I'm saying the Scottish people have the right to self-determination as any country in the world has the right to self-determination. And the things that could be done in Scotland in terms of curing the urban deprivation, in terms of industrial development, in terms of a better deal for our old people, this would make a tremendous transformation.
Are you in other regions too?
But pensions in Scotland should be higher than pensions in England? Well, is that the suggestion, yes or no?
Yes, it is.
All right, well, this is the breakup of the United Kingdom, because this really is divorce. All right, if an English government was faced by the fact that pensioners in Glasgow were paid more than pensioners in Manchester and Liverpool, don't imagine that this would be a very cosy relationship. And you see, your colleagues assume that there would be a cooperative relationship between an independent Scotland and England. Now, given that there was this kind of difference, this would be divorce.
Yeah.
You couldn't get this kind of cooperative relationship.
It's maybe better term than being a battered wife.
Why should I, as an English MP, vote for lower pensions for my people and higher pensions for yours?
You're not voting for lower pensions or higher pensions. You're voting for pensions according to what you can afford in your economy.
But if you hog all the money and it leaves less for the pensioners in England, now I'm not just going to sit back and accept that. Not on your life, I'm not going to accept it.
It doesn't matter what the Scottish people want. It doesn't matter how they vote. They could vote 90% SNP and you would still want to stop them from becoming self-government. That, Joe, is a very serious undemocratic argument.
But it's not undemocratic for me voting for my own constituents. Those are the people I represent.
Would you support Indian independence? Any other countries' independence?
I think both countries are too civilized to get locked in an undignified squabble like this about the oil money. I really do. I don't believe that there's any substantial body of the Scottish people which has really got its hands out grasping the oil revenues. It's not true.
Tuesday morning, our MP's breakfast in Edinburgh.
We've been talking about for the last 2 days. It's suddenly hit the headlines. They're working up to Scottish devolution.
I think you're right. And one thing I notice, if you look at the Scottish newspapers compared to the English, the Scottish newspapers, it's Scottish oil. English newspapers, it's British oil. Scottish oil in the Scotsman, Scottish oil in the Scottish Daily News, and yet you look at the Sun and the Guardian, it's British oil. And I think the one thing that people down south don't realise is that Scotland does have its own newspapers. It's got its own television. I always thought, I listened to the radio this morning on the Today programme, I always thought that was a national programme on the BBC. I find in Scotland it's different. And they, even on the BBC, talk of Scottish oil. And this is what we never realise in England, you know, the constant barrage. What I'd like to do today is to talk to people who are not really Scots nats, but people who are more like you and more like I, but they're perhaps different nationalities, but same sort of backgrounds.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I suppose each of the newspapers sees it from the point of view of what they're reading public, but we want to try and see it from the point of view of the ordinary Scots chap.
The miners are still the custodians of Scotland's strong socialist tradition. The Scottish TUC and the influential Scottish Communist Party both favour more self-government. Killoch Colliery, Ayrshire, is in the constituency of left-wing Labour MP Jim Sillars, an advocate of much greater independence from Westminster.
I'm telling you, Jim, there's no difference. Doesn't matter whether they're English, Scottish, Welsh, when miners come up the pit, they're the same people anywhere. You can't see any difference at all. This could be in Bassett Law at any pit there in my area. Yeah, same sort of people.
Yeah, but you haven't talked to the men yet. When you come to talk to them, there's no difference in terms of being minor. There is difference in terms of politics and the development of Scottish politics in relation to Scottish problems.
Let's go and talk to a few.
Fair enough.
Okay. You know, when I first came here today, about half an hour ago, this could have been any pit in my part of the world. There's no difference at all to look at it between a colliery at Bevercourts in Bassett Law and a colliery here. And when you come through that door, it says National Coal Board. When I meet you lads, it's National Union of Mine Workers. But suddenly it's Scottish Oil. Now, it doesn't ring true to me.
You're quite wrong, Joe, because you're not saying anything that we disagree with. None of us here are going to argue that it's Scottish oil and that the Scottish people should get all the wealth from that oil. We're not arguing that at all. What we are arguing is that there is a Scottish dimension to politics inside the United Kingdom, and that the Scottish people are quite distinct from the people in Yorkshire insofar as we're a nation and they happen to be a region of a nation, and we're basically asking for nothing more than our legitimate rights that the Labour government and the Parliamentary Labour Party carry out its election promise made to the Scottish working people last October.
These
that we
lads
get
are
a Scottish
still
Parliament.
working class trade unionists the same as my supporters are. As an Englishman, let me say this, the pits in my area were keeping the pits in Scotland area open. Yeah, no, listen, let me just finish with this guy first. A lot of the pits in Yorkshire and Nottinghamshire were making high profits through the 60s and were keeping Scottish pits open.
What about the extra surcharge that we had to pay?
Yeah, but listen, my people in my part of the world didn't say then we should stand each pit on its own feet and we should get the high wages. Now, it looks to a lot of us that as soon as you get the oil, the national brotherhood and the unity begins to fall apart. You know, it's what's in it for us.
We don't want separatism in any shape or form.
What we want is some people that we can get in contact, no remote from us, and be able to plan the question of the Scottish economy, Scottish culture, and various other aspects of it. And the question of spin-off, because as we see it, what's going to take place is the oil's going to be taken somewhere else to be refined.
We want a Scottish Parliament set up in this session, and we want it to have economic teeth. Not just sitting up there as puppets, being told what to do from Westminster.
Don't think
and
English
if we don't
MPs
get that, then we will never be satisfied.
Well, don't think English MPs are just going to nod it through without any examination of what it's going to affect their own English constituents.
Well, you've got less confidence in the Union than I have. What you're really saying is that if Westminster loosens the reins a little, the Scottish horse will bolt.
The SNP will bolt.
But they're only a minority party.
Will use it.
Look, the SNP got 30% of the vote at the last election, and opinion polls and surveys indicate that at least half of their support do not want separation, but believe they had to go to the extreme to get the moderate position. And if we're denied devolution, then you'll force the whole of the Scottish people into that position for actually voting for separation, although all they want is devolution.
While our English MPs continued their political journey, World in Action commissioned a poll to assess Scottish attitudes. Scottish voters were asked what percentage of North Sea oil revenues they thought should come to Scotland. All of them, 22%. Most of them, 33%. An amount proportionate to Scotland's population, 42%. So more than half the Scottish electorate want most of North Sea oil money for Scotland. Even 40% of Conservatives agreed. A surprising number of Labour voters, 60%, wanted most North Sea oil money to come to Scotland, a figure not far behind the views of Scottish nationalist voters. The most worrying thing for Labour was that 20% of Labour voters said they would switch to the nationalists if less oil money came to Scotland than they wanted. Voters were then asked how much self-government they wanted for Scotland. Things to stay as they are, 17%. Some Scottish control over its own affairs, but not over oil revenue, 15%. Much more Scottish control over its own affairs, including oil money, 44%. Complete independence, 22%. So 2/3 of Scottish voters want either independence or at least much more control over Scottish affairs, including oil money. Tory voters were least interested in self-government, but even so, nearly half of them wanted much more Scottish control. Again, surprisingly, nearly 2/3 of Labour voters wanted much more control over Scottish affairs, including oil revenue. Less than half Scottish National supporters wanted complete independence, but the vast majority favoured much more Scottish control. Again, 1/5 of Labour voters said they would switch to the Nationalists if less self-government came to Scotland than they wanted. If this happened, the Scottish National Party might well have a majority of Scotland's 71 seats. One nationalist who shook Labour's dominance in Glasgow is Margaret MacDonald. She won the Shipyard constituency of Govan at a by-election, but lost it at the general election. Our MPs met her at the end of their first week in Scotland.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
Presumably, you came to Scotland not having any firm ideas on what should be happening as regards devolution. Have you shifted at all? Has anything you found out made you change your opinion?
Speaking personally, I've shifted. Not a great deal, but I've shifted, I must admit. Like a lot of English MPs, I was preoccupied with problems of my own constituency and thought, that's a Scottish problem, we'll face it when we come to it. We've now come to it. I've been educated to a certain extent in these past 4 days. I'm fully prepared to, agree that the Scottish people should have their own assembly and this sort of thing. I'm fully prepared to accept that a substantial part of the oil cash and oil revenue should go solely to Scotland.
What part?
Well, this is where the disagreement would come. I don't think any English MP is going to vote for Scotland having the whole of the oil money, because England couldn't afford it. And I don't think any English MP would go along with that.
That's the only reason?
As an Englishman, I've got to say that Merseyside and Newcastle and places like that need it just as much as Glasgow. And it is British oil, and it's only right that some of that British oil cash goes into these areas just as much as it goes into Glasgow.
Right, some of that British oil cash goes into Merseyside. I would go along with that. Yeah. But you see, I believe that we're not going to see any of it in Scotland, in Glasgow, in the West, unless we control it. Listen, your government has mortgaged the oil or the revenues from oil up to here, and it's going to keep going on. How do we build the houses in your bad debts? You tell me how we make Clydeside a decent place for people to live in if we don't have access to that oil money. I don't believe for a minute that your Labour Party manifesto, which will bind even your Scottish Labour MPs, is going to promise an assembly with economic powers and powers over trade and industry. Or is it? You tell me it is, and that's great.
Well, we've not seen the white paper of the bill, so nobody knows. But I don't think it's going to be totally toothless, and I don't think it's going to be 100% Scottish oil for Scottish people. I think there's going to be some compromise in between, as Ronald said.
Well, Joe, you have moved. You've said that. You've moved since coming up to Scotland, and even you say that you would only give the Scots a small percentage.
I didn't say a small percentage.
Right, a minority
I said a percentage. I didn't say minority. I said
you would give us more than 50%.
Listen, I said a percentage to be agreed.
Well,
and I think this has got
come on,
to be
we'll negotiate then.
Well, it'll take us a lot longer than a few minutes on television to conduct the negotiations.
No, but seriously, are you telling me, quite seriously, that you would opt for Scotland having more than 50% of the share of the revenues from the oil?
It would depend on what those revenues were spent on. If they were going to be spent on jobs and all this sort of thing, and the economy, which would add to the general well-being of the UK. If there's unemployment is nil in Scotland, it helps my part of the world because more industrialists come down there bringing their factories. And so, this is far too big a problem to give a snap answer like that. I don't think any politician is going to give that.
Well, we're not giving snap answers. You see, we've been talking...
No, but you're asking us to give a snap answer.
No, I think you should have the same sort of level of answers ready as we have, because we've trusted you in Westminster. Scottish people voted for your two parties. You have had every opportunity to examine what's happening in Scotland, and you haven't done so. Why should we trust you? People in Scotland are inevitably going to start taking decisions from a Scottish point of view, which will require to be carried out Scottish sovereignty vested in an assembly. I think that's the logical.
You're defending your view very attractively, but you are in fact defending the view of break-up of the United Kingdom.
Now's the day and now's the hour, see the front of battle loud, say approach proud Edward's power, chains and slavery.
By the end of their week in Scotland, our MPs admitted that the strength of feeling for more self-government was greater than they anticipated. Next week, in the days before the government announces its plans for Scottish devolution, they return to hear the arguments about how this might work in practice and assess the dangers which some Scots fear might follow from the greatest shake-up of the British Constitution for more than 2 centuries.
We've been here now a week, and we're going to know more about this damn problem than what some of the Scots are.
In a few days' time, the British government will offer more self-government to Scotland. Last week, World in Action took 2 English MPs, Socialist Joe Ashton and Conservative Ronald to hear some Scots argue for independence and a greater share of North Sea oil. This week, they see how a measure of Scottish devolution might work and discover the divisions this has caused in Scotland. A political journey. Our 2 MPs began their week in Edinburgh, the ancient capital of Scotland.
I mean, I don't come up here so much a hardline Englishman as I was last week, because I can see that if we lose those Scottish Labour MPs at Westminster, we've lost our majority.
I could see you moving, Joe, when we were in Ayrshire and talking to those miners.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're all politicians, you know. I mean,
yes.
we could have a situation here where Scotland was permanently Labour and England was permanently Conservative. But let's be honest, Ronald, let's be honest. You're a Conservative.
Yeah.
I'm Labour.
Yeah.
We've got more to lose than you have. The present setup, you know, or even if a breakaway came about, the Conservatives would benefit far more than the Labour Party would. If you got rid of 20 militant Scottish Labour MPs from Westminster, you'd say good riddance. You know,
we would, you're quite right. But you know, Joe,
we would suffer from
if we got rid of 20 militant Labour MPs from England, we'd say jolly good riddance still.
But from a Labour Party.
At the last election, both the Labour and Conservative parties promised to give Scotland more self-government and its own National Assembly in Edinburgh. On Edinburgh's Carlton Hill, high above the city, our 2 travellers talked to John McIntosh, Labour MP for Berwick and East Lothian, and author of standard works on the British Cabinet and Scottish devolution.
I try to show people is that Edinburgh is not just another attractive provincial city like Bristol. It has got a quasi-capital atmosphere because we have some of the institutions that do make for a separate country, in this sense that we do have our separate educational system. You see the Edinburgh University there. What makes Scotsmen different from others is not ancestry, it's whether they've been through a Scottish school and university that I think marks them out. Now then, over there, the Scottish law courts, and we've got the Court of Session and the whole Scottish legal system, which has a Roman law origin. And then there's the Church of Scotland headquarters just below the castle, where the General Assembly of what is our established church, a Presbyterian church, meets. It's the only thing actually we've got rather like a parliament at the moment, because it's a meeting of all the church to discuss not only religious but lay issues. And then that blue dome there is in Charlotte Square, which is the financial centre of Edinburgh, where we've got our insurance companies, our banking companies, with a very worldwide investment policy. So these are the institutions that have their focal point in Scotland and have left people with some sense of being different or Scottish as well as British. It's like the Scottish regiments in the British Army. Doesn't mean you're not British, but it gives you a difference. And of course here, down here, this big building, St Andrew's House, and this ghastly looking monstrosity that has been built, I think one of the worst bits of architecture I've ever seen, is the other half of the Scottish Office. These 2 house the civil servants of the Scottish Office, which are the equivalent of 9 ministries in England, and they run our education, our legal system, our local government system, our roads, our agriculture. And even if there was no Scottish National Party at all, in my view, for 20 years, I wanted an assembly to control these chaps.
You're not put off by what they did over there, John, are you?
Well, they didn't ask us, you see, that's the trouble.
Yes.
And one of the things is that people say you need more civil servants to run Scotland. We don't, we've got them. All of them, look.
Yes.
2 great big blocks of what we haven't got is a method of controlling them. I tell you, my friends in
government will
Whitehall
decide,
tell
not
me
English
that
MPs.
these civil servants up here have a much easier time. They're able men, they're patriotic and good men, but they do have much freer rope in Scotland because the assembly that controls them is in London.
I wonder whether you'll be successful in controlling them by splitting up the deliberative function between Westminster and Edinburgh.
Well, we don't control them now, certainly. This worries us a great deal, and I think you're much better if you're controlling anybody to be where they are and where the centre of the institutions are.
Why? You won't be able to walk through that door down there. A Scots person living in Edinburgh can't walk and talk to a civil servant in there about his
but he
house
could
or his,
walk and talk
his
in
school.
Just
No
down
more than he
there.
could in
Just
London.
down there is where we're going to have the Scottish Assembly. He can walk in, see his assemblyman, who can then say, right, I will go and see the civil servant.
But
or
why
fix
is this
it up.
different from walking and seeing his MP on a Saturday morning in Edinburgh, who next week will then go and see the civil servants in London?
I don't understand why you're so aggressive about this. It seems to me if a group of people want to run their own affairs, and there's overwhelming desire for this in Scotland, why not let them? If the English
I'm not
regions want
objecting.
to do the same thing, we're not stopping them. They're welcome. It's the civil service bureaucracy we want to cut down.
What you want to do is bring them all together and shoot them, is it?
I don't want to shoot them, but I want to keep my finger on them.
Don't they ever clean any of the buildings in Edinburgh, Ronald?
This is the Royal High School in Edinburgh, now hot favourite to be the site for the new Scottish Assembly.
And I see it's got the Union Jack flying over it, Joe, which is a good sign.
We understand the Assembly will work like this. There'll be a chief executive, a cabinet and 142 assemblymen. It'll get a block grant of £2 billion a year from the British cabinet, but can raise an extra £200 million by taxing the Scottish public. The Scottish Secretary of State will stay in the British cabinet, but control of education, housing, health and agriculture will pass to the Assembly. But it will have limited powers over trade and industry and no power over oil money. Ronald Bell is worried about what the Scottish National Party will make of the proposals.
You see, I can see 2 difficulties, John. One is that we might give less powers to this Assembly than some people want, and then the SNP would use that. They say, well, it can't succeed, it hasn't got enough powers, and so it would lead on to independence. Or we might give too many powers, and then there would be the danger of a separate a crystallization of a separate attitude up here, adverse to the rest of the island. Now, these are the 2 dangers that I see. What's your feeling about those?
Well, I understand people's fears about this, but in the first place, we are already on a slippery slope. If you're worried about the unity of the United Kingdom, as I am, we are. We are both worried about this, and we're on the slope. You look at the Scottish National Party's vote has doubled at most general elections. They've now got 11 members and 30% of the vote. And the clear thing is if we do nothing, then it's likely to go further. Now, the second point about it, and I accept your worries on this matter, the second point about the whole question of this is that the majority of the Scottish electorate actually don't want independence, but a majority do want the kind of extra control that an assembly would give. It's something like 60–70% of voters. My own Labour voters, Joe, on the polls, and your poll in this programme proved it, want it. Now, if you give them what they want, you stop them voting
But hang
for the
on, John, they
SNP.
wanted more than that. They didn't just want the Assembly. They wanted full powers for the Assembly.
Well,
and
some
they
did.
wanted most of the cash on the poll. Now, that's separatism.
Could I come back on Ronnie on a point here? Ronnie, you've got a slippery slope as well as those of us who are advocating an assembly. That is to say, you have to face the fact, how much good will it do a separatist party which can say, as my opponent did at the last election, look, friends, it's not a question of whether you're for independence. It's a question of whether you're going to get fair treatment and more democracy in Scotland, and you won't get it till there's more SNP members of Parliament. They all say, and there's some truth in it, that the English never paid any attention to this until you put a batch of SNP MPs. They'll say, double the number of SNP MPs, and look, even Mr. Bell might vote for our Assembly then. Now, that is the slippery slope that frightens me.
It is. He's right. I think John's right on that. You know, we have left it too late, and it is becoming a powerful weapon for the SNP.
Of course, it's been left too long. I mean, some kind of devolution of administration is obviously overdue. Everybody accepts that.
No, Ronnie, we've got devolved administration. I pointed out the place where the civil servants live. Devolved democratic control.
Devolved democratic control means a number of parliaments in the United Kingdom, doesn't it? And you know, parliaments are very powerful things. If you have a number of them in the United Kingdom, the United Kingdom's gone.
Next to the northern extremity of the United Kingdom lie the oil-rich islands of the Shetlands. Not all Scots are happy about the prospect of too much power being taken from Westminster and placed in the central belt of Scotland. Ronald Bell MP, an English Home Counties lawyer, and Joe Ashton MP, a Yorkshireman, fly to the north for the first time. With Joe Grimmond, Liberal member for Orkney and Shetland.
We're on our way to your Shetlands constituency, Joe. We've been looking at this newspaper and it says, it's not that we wish to deny the Scottish people their right to an assembly. It's simply that we want nothing to do with it. That's a fine, healthy attitude. Is that what they think in Shetlands?
No, I think that's an exaggeration. We were very happy to have an assembly. The thing is that we want devolution to go beyond Edinburgh.
I seem to remember saying about that. Bigger fleas have little fleas upon their backs to bite them, and so on ad infinitum. I think Joe and I would like to know whether you're going to have a very strict immigration law if all this happens.
Oh, we are very strict indeed, Ronald, very strict indeed, and particularly against lawyers.
Well, it's not snowing, Joe.
Not yet.
I thought we were going to see some Eskimos.
Under the local government reshuffle, the 36,000 islanders of Orkney and Shetland were each given their own island authority, and Shetland has also negotiated a deal with the oil companies which gives them £3 million a year in compensation for the disruption caused by oil development. Lerwick, capital of the Shetlands, first settled by the Vikings and ceded to Scotland in 1469. It's as far from London as it is from Prague in Czechoslovakia, and further from Edinburgh than from Bergen in Norway. Down by the quayside, 3 distinguished islanders waited to welcome our party. Basil Wishart, editor of the Shetland Times, Howie Firth, SNP candidate for Orkney and Shetland, he lives in Orkney and flew in for the day, and Ian Clark, chief executive of the Shetland Island Council and a strong defender of Shetland's autonomy.
Well, well.
Delicious. The only two Indians.
No, it's the sun. More pornographic plus the sun. Yes, the sun.
The only two Indians in Shetland were running the fish and chip shop, as we knew they would be.
Good Shetland fish.
And they're delicious.
Joe, the Times thinks you made an interesting speech about all this, and
Times is right.
Well, Times, of course, they're right. But the Times and others are beginning to shoot from the hip with Shetland now. You see, when devolution comes up, they say, oh, but you only have to go a bit further north again and you get to Shetland, and that's the last thing they want. They want to stay with Britain, or anyway, they don't want to become independent. They might even go with Norway if it came to the point. What do you think about that?
You refer to the London Times. The Times here is the Shetland Times, I'm strong.
All right, the London Times.
The London Times is making a perfectly good point in relation to my speech. What I was saying was that, first of all, there is genuine fear that a Scottish Assembly will be too much dominated from the central belt.
Yeah.
Secondly, that what the British people want is less and better government and not more government, and therefore one tier of government in Scotland might go.
Oh, I get that.
But when they come to Shetland,
what
I am saying is that certainly we are different from Scotland in some ways. After all, the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man are treated differently. But to my mind, I don't think most Shetlands want separation. They want their way of life protected.
Let's get to the basic power game. Shetland is being used as a pawn now. It's the best thing that's happened to Harold Wilson, because every time the SNP stand up and shout about Scottish oil, he said, well, what about Shetland oil? And they haven't got an answer. Now, you're this two tiny islands, and you're being used in this power game pawn down in London.
But we're going to make the most of it.
Yeah,
Why shouldn't we then get what we can while the going is good?
Of course. So you're going to play both sides off against the other.
But we know full well, and of course so does Harold Wilson know full well, what the end of the game is. I mean, at the end, it is quite apparent that the oil, most of it, must go to the UK, and indeed world purposes, and that we can only hope that devolution is going to come, in my view, is going to be an assembly. We only hope it's a sensible assembly, and that it will save.
You're still sitting on the wall laughing at both sides.
Well, certainly.
Why should the guy have in trouble?
The Shetland position is muddied when you throw the Shetland situation into the Scottish Assembly situation.
That's it.
What Shetland is saying isn't a plague on both your houses. Shetland is saying that by a lot of effort, the existing circumstances give a considerable deal of autonomy to the Shetland community. So just please let us alone.
So I think there is a very grave danger that unless one takes from the regions enough of the authority that's recently been given to them to give the Assembly something to do, it'll simply be a talking shop. Furthermore, it will be a talking shop, not dominated even by the SNP, but I regret to say by retired Glasgow Labour councillors.
I think that in the past decade, if any local authority has managed to show that government can work at any level, it really has been the Shetland Local Authority over the last 3 years.
Well, why have they done so well? You know, why are you doing so well?
Because they know the local stuff.
No, but
they know what they're talking
I'm not
about.
talking about that, Ronald.
Because of dedication.
Well, look, everybody, every councillor in every council in the country says this, that we are the greatest, you know. But I mean, why have things suddenly improved over the last few years? Surely it's because of the oil, although it might be temporary like Joseph.
No. And I think, Joe, we're getting our confidence back. See, for so long we've had this feeling that in the islands in some way we're inferior. Now we're realising we can handle oil negotiations and that we can handle politics and we can handle international companies, and we're getting our confidence back. And this is why we want to preserve what powers we have and enlarge them where we need them.
I must say, I think you're a very civilised lot of Vikings.
Back on the mainland, the headlines in Scotland were about a split in the Tory party over the Scottish Assembly and stories that English politicians were planning to delay the Scottish devolution bill.
Now, let's be frank about it. Your party no longer has the faintest idea what it wants. My party thought it knew what it wanted and is beginning to think that that's what it doesn't want.
We know where we are. I'm for it, you're against it. I think they should have an assembly. You think that they shouldn't.
In Glasgow, our two English MPs talked to the Scottish Tories, the party worst hit by the Nationalists, who took 8 seats from them at the last election. Of 71 Scottish MPs, only 16 are now Tory, and those 16 are badly split on the issue of devolution. Last week, Mrs Thatcher added to their confusion by blowing cool on the whole idea. Our two MPs went to the home of Teddy Taylor, Tory MP for Cathcart. He now fears that his party was wrong to support devolution, should admit it, and defend the present political union of Scotland and England at Westminster. By contrast, Malcolm Rifkin, Tory MP for Edinburgh Pentlands and Scottish frontbench spokesman on devolution, believes the Tories should stick by their pledge to support a Scottish Assembly.
Certainly the Tory party has been jumping around. No question of that. Of course we have. The conference voted solidly against devolution, then it voted solidly for devolution, and sometimes, of course, our conferences are like that, depending on the lead given from the platform. I might make the same other. But on the other hand, what I think Mrs Thatcher is going to say as a new leader, and remember, as a new leader with a new thought, is to say, convince me of the good this will do for the people of Scotland. She's interested in Scotland. She's a great reception.
She's also more interested in England. You know,
she's interested in what's good for Scotland, I'm sure, and what she'll say is, convince me this will do some good. I get the impression from Labour MPs, from Tory MPs and from others that, quite frankly, they don't really want the devolution. They don't think it's going to do a great deal of good.
Malcolm, opinion in our party, the Conservative Party, has been moving, as I see it, I should say, for a good 3 months now. My estimate of things is that now that the main body of the party, which inevitably is in England, has woken up to the fact that this is really coming forward, there's been a very great shift of opinion away from any form of devolution and certainly from any substantial transfer of powers from Westminster. What do you think?
The important thing is that 2/3 of the Scottish Tory members do believe in an assembly. The Scottish Tories at their conference in Dundee voted overwhelmingly for it. And I've not the slightest doubt when we put to people, our colleagues in England, that what we're really talking about is decentralisation of government within the United Kingdom. I'm as much a unionist as you are.
How is it going to help us to solve Scotland's problems to have an extra 152 MPs sitting in Edinburgh, spending money, imposing taxes, it seems, according to some of the plans, setting up commissions, boards, councils, wanting consultations and anything? What I do is I look out at my constituency here, talk to people in Glasgow and think, how is it going to help them with their problems? We've got terrible problems here, and I think it'll just mean more delay. And the other thing which is vital, it's going to mean another year of talking. A year of talking about devolution instead of getting down to sorting out problems. And quite frankly, it won't wash.
Well, there's going to be a year of talking about devolution, actually, isn't there? Because we pretty well know now that there won't even be a bill next session. It's going to be a talk about what we'll do in the following session of Parliament.
What did the ballot box show last time? Sheila, for example, doesn't want it at all. Who should she vote for? The Tory party was officially for it, the Liberal party was for it, the Labour party was for it, the Nationalists were for it. Now, who do you vote for? There was no one standing for the unionist line. And this, I think, quite frankly, is that the case has not been put.
But Teddy,
the argument is just starting.
If you're arguing that the Tory party did badly in Scotland, because it wasn't unionist enough. And it seems very curious for Tory voters to vote nationalist because we aren't unionist enough. People don't think like that.
Well, I think why they were not voting for us is because we were, in fact, a Me Tooist party. We were going half away with every
Is
other
it not
party.
at least as arguable that the reason why they didn't vote for us is that although we had promised an assembly several years ago, although we had committed ourselves and won the 1970 election on a devolution policy, we didn't produce the goods?
I've had a feeling the Conservative Party has never been happy about this devolution business at all. I think there's a lot of people in Scotland who want the case for the union in its present form to be put. It hasn't been put, and I think we'd probably do better if, in fact, we said what, quite frankly, I think most of us believe.
You kicked out Ted Heath because the public didn't want him, and so you got rid of him. Now, in the same way it'll happen in Scotland. If the public in Scotland want an assembly and you don't give it them, they'll get rid of you. The public gets what it
John,
wants.
this is Joe, this is the
in the
thing.
long
How
run.
much do you think this
That's
is
why
wanted?
Ted Heath's out of a job.
Why do you think how much this is wanted? What I think you've got to say to people is, do you think it would help you and help Scotland to have 152 more MPs on top of all those you've got? And this is what it would be.
Can I put
It's the
it
cash
this way?
from the oil that they want,
Yes, but
you
look,
know.
the cash from the oil, it's only because the cash from the oil is there that we are able now to talk about independence. And maybe putting it a bit crudely, but it seems to me that that really is just like my husband winning the pools and deciding that he could much better spend the money if he didn't have me and the children to look after. And I think that England will suffer.
Even for oil. Even for oil.
Scottish businessmen don't have the same muscle as their English counterparts. Over half the private sector of Scottish industry is English or American owned. Some businessmen, like Sir Hugh Fraser, head of the multi-million-pound group which owns Harrods and the Glasgow Herald newspaper, have already joined the Scottish National Party. Here tonight is another convert, Ian Noble, former Edinburgh merchant banker who owns 20,000 acres in the Isle of Skye. The other businessmen here remain open-minded about Scotland's political future. Sir William Lithgow, Deputy Chairman of Scott Lithgow Shipbuilders, the largest private shipbuilders in Scotland. Robin Duthie, Chairman of Blacks of Greenock, the well-known tent makers. Gavin Hepburn, Managing Director of Fife Forge, winners of the Queen's Award to Industry.
Well, I believe that decentralisation of government is very desirable. I think this is the one thing that all Scots feel very strongly. But I think it's also a thing that people in the northeast coast of England feel just as strongly, that we too much are dependent on the southeast corner of this island. I think that the whole principle of government from the southeast is something that not just Scotland, but the whole of the rest of Britain feel.
Yeah, but look, can I come in? You're not politicians and you're not civil servants. Your business is business, which is what we're going to talk about. Now, you're not fools and you know the public's not gullible. But how can you sort of sell a thing just by wrapping a tartan package around it? Now, you know, can it stand without English subsidies or subsidies from London to the shipyards on the Clyde? Can they stand on their own feet, or are they going to still have to be bailed out by the oil and still have to be propped up by some other form of cash from somewhere?
And one of the things that people in politics and people in public service have got to appreciate is that this country lives by productive effort. And for too long, the industrial centres have had to suffer from remote control and they're misunderstanding by people who are far removed from the centres of action.
But this is a standard businessman's excuse. It's always the fault of the government or the civil servants or the unions or the strikers. But the fact is, on shipyards, we used to be 6th in the world. We've dropped to 14th. You know, and it's happened with a lot of industries. Chrysler down the road can't produce a car which will sell. Now, you can blame this on to Ricardo or the American multinationals, but Scotland's still got a lot of basic problems with its dying industries. And is the oil or Home Rule or a Scottish Assembly going to provide anything different from a business point of view, not from a politician's point of view or from an administration point of view?
Well, if a company is badly run in industry, you normally decide that the best answer is to put in new management. And if Scotland as a country has produced the kind of results you've described, and assuming it is justified for a moment, the answer is that you need new management and a new system of government.
We have got a chip on our shoulder. That is absolutely true. And it's mainly because of the type of comment that you make. You keep on saying the English, and the English subsidise us in Scotland. Now, the English do not subsidise us. We are subsidised if we have to be, as a region, because we are far away from the centre of power, by the British government. And the reason we need subsidy is because of years and years of mismanagement from the south.
I believe that the Scot can take on the English at any given thing. We happen to have a problem that we are a bit further away from the general market in this country. The general market in this country is the southeast of England. And because it is in the southeast of England, we have got to transport our goods to it. We have got to take our manufactured raw materials to Scotland before that happens. And we do have problems. Now, one of the reasons why the centre of our markets is in the centre of England is that the whole of the central government is in the southeast of England, and that's the whole of the central government for the whole of Scotland, England, Ireland and Wales.
Yeah, but it's still
and it should be scattered. Why the hell should it be down in the southeast of England?
Look, next week or just after, there's a white paper coming out which the British government is going to tell us what it intends to do. But the thing is, I mean, English MPs will demand a year to talk about it. And the SNP will use it. Now, how do you get out of this dilemma? They'll use it against us.
Don't be scared of the SNP. Politically, Westminster has always got frightened of what was going on in Scotland. And you've got frightened about our problems and you haven't noticed our successes. Don't be scared of the SNP, but you can find virtue out of necessity, because this issue of decentralisation is as real to people in the West Country of England as it is to people here in Scotland.
The border is
Some more for me, please.
This is the border, Ronald.
Is it? Oh,
this is where we cross into England.
Is it?
Well, back on your roast beef.
Not just yet, is it?
Are we there, the border?
Yes,
you're over the border. Oh, we're over the border.
Yes, yes, please. And peas.
Looks a bit greener already.
You're looking at the peas, my dear
chap. The sheep look fatter.
Joe, you're biased. You see, when this white paper comes out in, well, in about a week's time, it's going to disappoint most people in Scotland by its contents, and it's going to outrage quite a lot of people in England for the opposite reason, going too far. A lot of people in Scotland say it's not going far enough. So it may be another bone of contention instead of bringing them together. And there's a big public relations job to be done. And I suppose...
You and I aren't going to do it.
Well, we can help, surely, can't we?
We can, but we can talk to as many people as we like, but it's still going to be there, England versus Scotland.
I'm afraid you've got a choice here, so unfortunately I've only one pie.
Never mind, you'll give me that. That's excellent.
Thanks
Thanks,
very much.
Yeah. Of course, no single person's going to do it, but everybody's got to bend his mind to that. Otherwise, we're going to end up with two closed communities.
Well, I'm afraid
very dangerous.
We've already got that now.
Well, no, we haven't got as far as that yet, but we're in real danger of it by neglect and ignorance, a growing lack of understanding, which can easily become a growing lack of sympathy.